All right, welcome back for week 2 of e-learning. So we spent the last couple weeks working on natural selection, so how the environment selects for you as an organism to survive or die, and your adaptations that you are born with, in combination with where you're living, is going to either help you survive or not. So the evidence for how species or populations have evolved over time is a separate unit, and that's going to take a little bit of time to do. So, since we have a week before break, we're going to just segue into that by just tacking on one more thing. And that one more thing is called taxonomy. Taxonomy is a naming system that's done in Latin, and it's really important because it shows us how, by name, we are more closely related to another organism than maybe some others. So this system is really important for the scientific community, not only in seeing how closely related certain species are from an evolutionary level, but it's also important because it unifies different cultures. So we'll get to that in a bit. So the thing is that we can classify all different forms of life. We saw in the last slide how in this diagram we have all these different forms of life by this one system. So let's start with a central question, like what the heck is that thing? So this, for those of you that don't know, is called an axolotl. So it's a salamander that is native to Mexico. And the cool thing about this salamander is that if I cut off its arm, then it can grow it back. So it can, like starfish, regenerate limbs. Well, the other problem about this axolotl, though, or I should say the first problem, is if I call this an axolotl and I'm in North America, what would a German call it? Or what would somebody who's Chinese or Indian call it? Or somebody who's Polynesian? So we run into this language barrier. And so how do we solve that? So we solve this by implementing the taxonomic naming system. And let's figure out how that works. So first of all, where it came from is in the 1750s, this guy, Carolus Linnaeus, we'll call him Carl for short. Carl realized that language barriers were going to be a problem when we were communicating across cultures and countries. So at that time, most of the Western languages, at least, were based on Latin. So we came up with a Latin system that involves two names to name any organism we want. And so this system where you have two names is called binomial, bi meaning two, nomial meaning name, and nomenclature is system of naming. So that's literally a two-name system. So let's see how this two-name system works. So we go down here, and we see all of our different levels of taxonomic groups. So basically what I'm looking at is an upside-down pyramid. And the top of this upside-down pyramid is the most general category that I can put an organism in. So we start general. And then as we go down this pyramid, we get more and more specific with every group. So let me show you an example using this red fox. Okay? So we're starting in our most general group, which is called a domain. So your most general level is a domain. And a domain, in this case, for red fox, is going to be called eukarya, which means that you are, what do you think, eukaryotic or prokaryotic? So that means that since you're a eukaryote, you belong to the domain eukarya. And that means that any organism that has cells with nuclei in them can fit into this group. So, I mean, obviously there's going to be a lot more than just a fox in there. So how do we get down to the fox? Well, then we get more specific. So among all those eukaryotic organisms, we just want to deal with the animals. So then we narrow it down to a more specific level of kingdom. And specifically, that would be the animal kingdom. Well, then there's a lot of different animals. So what kind of animals do we want to talk about? Well, then we narrow it down to which phylum we want to be in. And based on that phylum, we want to deal with the phylum, or the group of animals that have spinal cords. So they're called chordates. So we have a spinal cord, so let's keep going. Well, this sucker is covered in fur. So what does that mean he's going to be? Well, what class of vertebrate animal is this going to be? It's going to be a mammal. Okay. Well, then we want to get more specific. So, among all these mammals, what kind of animal are we dealing with? What kind of diet does it have, for example? So, our order group is going to be carnivores. So, this fox eats meat, so it's going to be a carnivore. Okay, well, within all these different orders, okay, within the order Carnivora, what kind of family are we dealing with? So, this is a canine. Okay, so it's a relative of dogs and wolves. So it's Canidae. And then, well, what group of canines is this? So then we call it the genus, and so that is the Vulpes, and then the species within that genus is Vulpes. To give you another example, what your household dog is called Canis, and then its species is Familiaris. So, based on that, our dog that we have in a household is very closely related to the red fox. It's in the same family, but it has a different genus and a different species. So that's where it separates. So as we continue onward, let's look at how we can use this system for other organisms. But before we do that, here's a helpful mnemonic device. Because are you going to remember domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus? Yeah, sure, you can try. But here's a much simpler way to do that. So to remember the order of our taxonomic groups, we're going to start with this phrase. Dirty King Philip came over for German sausage. So Dirty King Philip came over for German sausage. If you can remember that phrase, or come up with your own, you're going to remember that dirty is our most general level, and D for dirty is D for domain. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So if you can remember Dirty King Philip came over for German sausage, you're going to be fine in terms of understanding taxonomic categories. So let's look at our domains here. So remember, our 3 domains are our most general level that we can have. So we were in eukarya for this fox. Okay, we would also belong to eukarya. But basically, we have 3 domains, and these other 2, bacteria and archaea, they don't have nuclei in their cells. But since we do, we belong to eukarya. Okay, so since we're in the eukaryotic domain, there are 4 kingdoms within that domain. And so those 4 kingdoms would be protists, plants, fungi, and animals. And then the other 2 kingdoms, for the total of 6, belong to the other 2 domains. And they're forms of bacteria. So as we keep going and we look more into this system, I want you to understand again that since we start out at a very general, broad, non-specific level and domain, that there's very few of them. Okay, it's like saying human. Okay, human's very general. Like we don't know, we have no idea which human you're trying to talk about. So if you just say human, okay, well that's a very broad category. But if you're trying to break it down eventually into all the different last names of humans living today, then you're going to get a lot of different categories for last names, right? And that's kind of what we're doing. So you get more kingdoms within the domain, so you get 6, because you're getting more specific. And the more specific you're getting, the more options you're going to have. Then you get a bunch of phyla, you get even more classes, more orders, more families, and the plural of genus is called genera. More genera, and the most options you have for any group is going to be species. Okay, why? Because it's the most specific. Okay, so as we go on, it's a lot of names. So what are we going to do with all these groups? Well, obviously, with all those 8 groups, we don't name every organism by running down the list. We have a much shorter version. So to name a given organism, we just focus on the last 2, therefore the most specific groups, the genus and the species. So let's go down and try this. So here we have written the scientific or taxonomic name of a human, a bison, and an axolotl. So a human, okay, is Homo sapiens, and let's do the breakdown of what that name actually is. There's 3 rules for writing a scientific name. The first is that the genus, being the least specific group of the 2, is going to be first. So rule number 1, write the genus first. And the subcategory of that rule would be the species would be second. Rule number 2 of the 3 rules is that the genus, the first letter, is always capitalized, but the species is never capitalized. There are no letters within the species that is going to be capitalized. So if I give you like 2 words of a scientific name and I'm like, which one is the genus? Your surefire clue for that is the one that has the capital letter in it is going to be the genus, because the species is never going to be capitalized. That's rule number 2. Rule number 3 of this 2-name system is that the whole name, both the genus and the species, are italicized. So if you were just writing the formula for this, it should look like this. Your genus is written before the species, genus first, species second. The next step is that the genus is capitalized, the species is never capitalized, and the entire name, the last and final rule, needs to be in italics. Okay? So, well, okay, what does this mean on a big picture? Well, let's use my name as an example. So when I hiked the Appalachian Trail, nobody knew my real name, so you all have a trail name, so I'm going to use that for kicks. My trail name was Gilligan, okay? So if my trail name is Gilligan, okay, that's kind of like my first name. So, well, which Gilligan am I? Well, let's use my last name. So that's my last name, Becker. So between Gilligan and Becker, which one would I put first? Which one would be the genus or the species? Well, the genus, remember, is like the group you come from. It's kind of like your family name. So, which Becker are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the Gilligan version. So, to narrow it down to Gilligan, we first need to go through Becker. So, Becker is going to be like our genus. So, if you were writing your name as a scientific name, you'd put your last name first. So, if Becker represents my genus, the B should be capitalized, should be in italics, and Becker should be first. And then the second part, the species, the most specific version, is going to be all lowercase and italicized in the second word. And there you go. You got yourself a scientific name. So you're localizing it to the group that you come from, and then the specific variety of the group that you are. Okay. And then down here, we have some common suffixes of taxonomic groups. So the thing about this is some kids tend to freak out. They don't know what this is about. The reason I did this is to show you some common endings that you'll find in some scientific names of today. So let me give you an example. If you see a word ever that ends in phyta, so the suffix of that word is going to be phyta, that means that you are looking at a phylum, which is also called division. You're looking at a phylum of plants. In addition to that, if you see a word that ends in phycota, that means that you're looking at a phylum or division of algae. Okay? If you're looking at something that ends in mycota, that means that you're looking at the phylum level of a fungi. Okay? So these common suffixes can show you that you're looking at an order, for example, or a family of a specific group. Okay? If you ever see a word that ends in ace, that means it's a taxonomic family of anything from bacteria to fungi. Okay? Animals, the animal families do not end in ace, they end in idae. So IDAE. But that's all this chart is, okay? So it's just showing you, these common suffixes, okay? So let's do an example. If I gave you the word lycopodiophyta, so let's spell it lycopodiophyta. Okay, what the heck does that word mean? You would know, based on the fact that it ends in phyta, that this is a phylum of plants. Okay, so it's that simple. But that's it. That's how taxonomy works. So we're just going to do some practices or some forms of practice of using this two-name system. So remember that when we do a two-name system, we just use the most specific groups, which is genus and species. Remember the three rules: that the genus is first, the species is second. Then the genus has a capital first letter, species never does, and then the whole name is going to be in italics, okay? And so some examples of that are Homo sapiens for human, bison for bison. This would be the genus because it's capitalized and it comes first. And the scientific name for the axolotl in the background is going to be Ambystoma, genus. Species would be Mexicanum, okay? So that's that. So let's go ahead and have some practice for taxonomy.